Welcome to the Luxury Listing Specialist Podcast with Michael LaFido, where top luxury agents reveal their best practices, plus interviews with real estate industry influencers, thought leaders, and luxury marketing experts. You'll come away from each episode with new strategies and tactics to dominate high-end homes in any market. And now for the latest episode of Luxury Listing Specialist. Here's your host, luxury real estate expert, coach, and trainer, Michael LaFido.
All right, folks, welcome to the Luxury Listing Podcast. My name is Michael LaFido, founder of the Luxury Listing Specialist Certification for Agents. And we have on this week's podcast, Patrick Lilly. Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about what it is you do and yourself.
Thanks, Michael, for having me on. I appreciate it. I sell real estate in New York City, in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And I've been selling for 32 years now. I've sold well over 1,000 homes and well over $1 billion worth of real estate. I wasn't always in the luxury end of the business. That has come about more recently, and that might be something that we talk about today, is about how do you go from being a non-luxury broker to a luxury broker.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a common question I get when I speak and train on national stages. And I do believe sometimes it's a limiting belief to many agents as far as, how do I make that transition from, entry level to, step up, properties to higher end to luxury. And there is a calculated difference in each of those price points depending on each area. So, maybe talk about that's a good transition, and perhaps share with the listeners how you made that transition and how did it occur and when did it occur, and if you have any tips or listeners, because again, this interview series, we're helping agents that are either in the luxury space or looking to differentiate themselves and break into or dominate by marketing luxury high-end homes.
Happy to. So I don't know, about 5 years ago, I decided that I really wanted to make the same amount of money that I was currently making, but I didn't want to work as hard. So I was trying to figure out ways to increase my profit and decrease the amount of hours that I was putting in. And it came clear to me that one $10 million deal is worth 10 $1 million deals, and they're no harder and no easier. So what would it take for me to raise my average price point? So at the time, my average price point was about $1.2 million,
okay,
which for many of your listeners probably is a luxury amount, but in New York City, it really isn't. And since I've made this change, my average price point is well over $2.5 million now. So I've over doubled it.
Yeah.
Which is substantial. And there's been several things that have led to that. Number one was I really started focusing on expired listings that were luxury expired listings. And the nice thing about focusing on luxury expired listing is you just get to put in a bottom number that you're not going to pitch that's underneath that number, which will automatically, if you land one listing, will raise your average price point from whatever your old price point was. So originally, my bottom line that I put in was $3 million. I wasn't going to pitch an expired unless it was $3 million or higher. And since, we've had success with that program, I've now moved it up to the bottom expired that I'm going to call as $5 million, because I'm still going to get, past sales from my sphere of, 500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million. But in order to really up my game, I focused on going after expired. And once you create a scenario, you put together a really good expired program for the luxury market, and you have a track record. So one of the things that I've done really well is when I've been the second broker or the third broker on a listing on a townhouse in New York City, I have a 100% success record. And on co-ops and condos, a 92% success record. So I'm able to use those competitive advantages for when I'm pitching those expired listings. Plus, it gives the expired sellers hope that their home can be sold if I've been able to have this track record.
Yeah, by the way, that's an impressive track record, by the way. Those numbers you banged out and kind of downplayed, maybe out of, not wanting to brag. That's really impressive, Patrick.
Well, thank you. And there's several plus points to having that. So one of the problems with expireds is often the listings are overpriced. It then allows me to say to the seller, look, I understand why you want to try to maximize your dollars. I totally get it, and I appreciate it, and I would probably do the same thing if I was in your shoes. But you've tried it now once with 6 months with one buyer and another 6 months with one broker, another 6 months with another broker, and it's not working. And let me tell you something. I'm really proud of this 100% success record I have with selling townhouses. And that gives people a lot of faith in me by having that. And I understand you want me to try this number too. I'm just telling you why I can't do it, because that number, if I don't sell it, then that number goes down, and I won't be able to provide the hope for other expired townhouse sellers like I can provide to you right now. So what I want to say up front is if you want to try it again at that number, I'm not the guy for you. I totally understand it and I appreciate it. No hard feelings. But if we want to get realistic about numbers and you really do want to move forward, and I would have already talked about what their goals are and why they were selling already, so we would have already covered that. If you really want to move forward so you can get to Santa Fe where you really want to have the quality of life that you want to have, or you want to downsize or whatever it is, then let's take the steps that are necessary. If not, totally no hard feelings, and let's move on.
So I like that. So you dig a little bit deeper, you figure out what their why, what their motivation is, and you incorporate that into your presentation. You bring it back to them.
Yeah. So that was the first step in moving things forward, was in the luxury market, was simply just going after higher price listings, double what I normally would have for the minimum that I would even try to get. So once you just land a couple of those, it raises your average price point on the sale.
All right.
The next step is, and this next step is really important. So the highest sale I had done when I started this program was $6.5 million. Again, $6.5 million sounds really good, but in New York, it's just okay. And I got an expired lead that was $15 million, and I wanted that lead. The house was beautiful, and it was just something that I knew that I could sell. And I knew the mistakes that the previous broker had made when marketing it. I also knew I stood little chance of getting it because luxury brokers want to list with luxury sellers want to list with brokers who already have a track record in their price point, and I did not have it in the $15 million price point. So what I then did was to bring in Emily Bear from our firm in New York, who's a really wonderful lady who I really respect and appreciate, and who has similar core values to myself. Brought her in because she sells at that price point quite frequently, and we split it 50-50. Well, we ended up doing the deal, and it's in contract and should close in a reasonable amount of time. It's been in contract for a long time, actually. And the point from this is I have gotten my first $25 million listing from that $15 million listing. I have my second $25 million listing all lined up, ready to go. And we landed a $9.4 million just recently also that we currently have on the market because of the way I'm able to get other listings, because now people look at me and, oh, this is the high-end townhouse broker, when just 5 years ago or 3 years ago I was not. So, getting those under your belt, partnering with somebody who has that track record, while you may lose money in the short term, in the long term, it's really, really effective. And I think one of the smartest things I've ever done.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. And so, you talked about step one, of course, going after canceled and expireds, and then step two, if I were to kind of, would you say that's more social proof? So in other words, again, sellers rarely will give you the opportunity unless you've sold similar properties. So, or would you say step two is more or less partnering up with someone that has that experience to get that first one underneath your belt? Is that more the lesson of step two for you?
I'd say the partnering up so that you have the track record, which makes it easier for other people to list with you at that price point. So
Okay.
Even though I've sold quite a few at the $6 million, now that I have all these higher listings, It's so much easier now when I go on a $6 million pitch, because now they see that I'm not their most expensive listing. They sign up even sooner now.
Yep. Yep. Good points. And they sign up sooner, and they probably don't beat you up over your fee as much.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, getting back to step one, you talked about canceling expireds. If you don't have to necessarily go into specifics, but are you more of a direct mail guy, door knock guy, calling? What would you?
We don't door knock in New York City.
Yeah.
They'd call the police on us. So no, we don't door knock. We do a combination of direct mail and cold calls.
Okay.
So the process is we've developed quite an array of mailings that are very high end and very produced, but answer very specific questions. So, for instance, one mailing might say, "Is the reason my home didn't sell is because it was overpriced." And then on the back, that'll just be in big white letters on a black background. It looks very high end. On the back, it'll say, "Not necessarily." And then we gave a case example of how we were able to sell the home and it wasn't reflective of the price. And so we have a whole scenario of like 6 different things for reasons why a home didn't sell. And then we start mailing those to the expired listings that are appropriate. So if I'm looking at their marketing and I feel like it's targeted in the wrong direction, then we'll send them a mailer that talks about, am I getting the right buyer in to see the property? Or if it needs to be a stage, I'll send them a staging one. So we'll, if it is a price thing, then I'll send a price one. And sometimes I'll send multiple ones if I'm not really sure why it didn't sell, since I haven't been able to meet with them. Then we'll sell out. We'll do some mailings about how I'm the expired listings expert, which is an angle that nobody else in New York is taking on their mailings. So that helps to differentiate my competition. And then I have a website called thetownhousespecialist.com, and then we hit them with that mailing, which again makes me come across as the expert. And then, when before I make the phone call, and especially if I really want the property, then I send them a box of customized chocolates, just 4 chocolates from Mary Bell, which is a high-end chocolatier here in Soho in Lower Manhattan. Really, some of the finest chocolates. And they do with laser printing. They do our logo on top of the chocolates, send them out, and then I call them. And I say, instead of just, calling them out of the blue, I say, "Hey, this is Patrick Lilly from Core. Did you get the chocolates I sent you?" So the listing, that $15 million listing that I got that's in contract, the reason she was called left and right by everybody, the reason she took my call was because of those chocolates.
Yeah, reciprocity.
That's
a giving hand.
Yeah, she said, that really stuck out from the crowd. I really appreciate that. So tell me, let's just talk. And that talk turned into me realizing I needed to bring Emily in on the listing pitch with me and to share it. But that's our step. So and I found that just sending out direct mail is not effective. Just doing phone calls is better than direct mail, to be honest. But it's also not effective. If you can combine the two, you'll be more successful.
Okay. No, that's great. That's great. Well, so we talked about, a little print. You talked about differentiation. You talked about how do you take that next step up, perhaps when you haven't uncharted territory. So partnering up. So that was the second step. And any other tips, suggestions to? So that's kind of cold marketing there. Perhaps once you get that big listing, you want to maybe share a tip or two for those listeners, that have a high-end listing that maybe isn't selling, maybe something you've done strategy-wise, unconventional, conventional, perhaps, that is working in your marketplace?
So one of the reasons I left my previous firm and joined the firm that I'm with now is because of the lack of press that was available at my previous firm, and how press-centric my new firm, Core, is, and I've been with them for like 3 years now, and maybe even longer. I can't remember. Okay. And so what luxury listings, it's so much easier to get press on luxury listings. We get press on all of our listings, not all of our listings, but the vast majority of our listings, and we do it multiple ways. One, we create stories about our listing. So each time we take a listing, regardless of the price point, we've tried to figure out who is the most likely buyer, what are their demographics, and what's the emotional reason that they're buying this property. In the luxury market, that's very different from a lower price market because it often has nothing to do with value, and it has more to do with the emotion that's behind what the purchase is about. So we determined what's the unique selling point on that property, who's the most likely buyer, then we target everything towards that prospective buyer in terms of copy, in terms of video, in terms of images, so we can get that buyer in there. So let me give you a couple of stories on how creating story and going after press has worked for us.
Please.
So I do some really great property videos. We try to keep our videos under 2 minutes, but that's a little difficult sometimes. So we definitely keep it under 2.5 minutes for each video because attention spans these days are not great. And when they go longer than 2.5 minutes, people just get bored. You're not being tight enough in what you're trying to get across. And one of the best things that I've ever learned about videos is from the CEO of our company. He said, a video of a luxury property should be a tease and not a tour. You're not there to show every bit and bob of the property. You're there to just entice them so they emotionally want to see it, and nothing more than that. So that's why you can keep your videos tight. So I got a listing for a townhouse in Greenwich Village that was around $5.5 million. And we had taken beautiful photographs, wrote great copy, and the person who ended up buying it saw it online and thought, this is not the location for her, this is not what she wanted, so she passed. Then the video, it took us longer to produce the video, it came out the following week, and she saw it, and she totally fell in love with her home because we were able to provide a story about that home as she walked through it that enabled her to imagine herself living in that home and what her quality of her life would be and how it'd be different from where she was currently living. So that video enticed her to see it. And the way she saw the video is that we were able to send it out to the press, and we got press on it. They put the video on. She saw the press piece, and that's when she made the appointment to come see it. The other story with the press that's been valuable is that we had a property, again, in the $6 million, it was $6.5 million in Murray Hill, and the seller was willing to take $6 million, but the highest offer we could get was after 4 months was $5.7 million. We could not get an offer above that. We were able to land a short piece in the Wall Street Journal on the house. And the day that the Wall Street Journal article came out, we immediately sent it to the highest buyer's broker to let them know that this just appeared in the journal. And that day, they came up to $6 million because of the Wall Street Journal piece, where the third party is replicating it. So figuring out ways to entice the media to do an article on your property is invaluable. And that can be a wide range. So, for instance, we had a little property. It was a $600,000 property on the Upper East Side. And in the story, because we tried to use interesting things to delineate it from others, we talked about how it was on a cul-de-sac on East 72nd Street. Now, you can imagine we don't have cul-de-sacs in New York, in Manhattan, but it was a dead-end street, and technically it was a cul-de-sac. So that was one of the things we were talking about, how quiet and zen-like the property was. 2 pieces of press picked up on the cul-de-sac point, and we got the buyer and sold it through the press, and the buyers would never have seen the property otherwise. And in fact, the property had been on the market with another broker for 10 months prior to us. We actually raised the price $15,000 and then sold it in the first month because of the press.
Oh, that's awesome. So getting the press is one thing, but leveraging it and letting potential people know, potential buyers or brokers or agents that have expressed some interest, because is it true or false? Don't you believe that high net worth individuals, they're either one or the other? Many are totally private, but many of them are what I like to call one-uppers, where they like to brag, tell a story.
Oh yeah. So even the private ones still like to see press on their property provided they're not mentioned in it.
Right.
So as long as you can keep their anonymity, they love press. And then there's sellers who may want anonymity, but they realize because of the nature of the name. For instance, I'm listing a very famous author's estate shortly. The listing agreement is out, so I'm not going to say who it is now.
Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Yeah.
And when we've already discussed with the estate, we are going to slam the press with the author's name because that will get us more money for the property.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this, obviously confidentiality and so forth, you give them the option, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we can, of course, go a little bit lower profile, but you're going to get less exposure, which of course will have a direct correlation on perhaps a lower sale price. So what's most important to you? Perhaps a little bit transparency, leveraging, that you own this home, you'll get you more money, or would you prefer maybe selling for less and it could take longer? I mean, is that a fair way of throwing?
Well, I like to turn negatives into positives. So there's a way to turn that less leverage into a positive. So when somebody has a concern about privacy, what we can then do is say to them, look, maybe the best thing here is that we do an off-market listing, that we just call up a couple of the top brokers, let them know about this property, no advertising, no Zillow, no Trulia, no nothing. Let's take this, no press, let's keep this really quiet and only get a few people in here, so we're going to have less traffic. But sometimes you can ask more money for a property when it's not being marketed out to the public, because then they have no way of really knowing what market value is if it's not offered to the market, if that makes sense. They can only determine market value by what they're going to guess it to be.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. And so you test that after a while, and if a seller says, "Hey, Patrick, I'm not getting the results that I want," what do you recommend next? And of course, you talk about more exposure, leveraging, marketing.
Yeah, let's list it. Let's list it. And if they still want anonymity, no problem. We'll keep this as quiet as possible. And as long as it's not in your name in public records, we can get away with it. So you have it in a corporate name that doesn't have your name on it, then that makes it a lot easier for us to continue. If we do put it out there in the public sphere, we can still keep your anonymity for you.
Right. And now, again, talking with high net worth individuals that are ultra private. I have a property I'm marketing that's $12.5 million, and the property's on a national, TV show, and he doesn't want his name mentioned anywhere, but somehow, the word's out there through neighbors and so forth. So even if you don't release that information, Patrick, do you go over with the seller that there still might be an outside probability that somehow their name is linked to the property, although you won't disclose that?
Yes and no. That can get you into trouble in some respects. So what I would do in a case like that is I would sign a confidentiality agreement with them right away to let them know that you are not going to say their name at all. So If it does come out, it doesn't come out by you. And that when you sign that confidentiality agreement, you can't tell anybody, you can't tell another broker who lives there. If another broker says, is this the home that Sean Penn lives in? You have to say, you answer no. You just answer no to all questions.
Right.
You just answer no. And they say, well, who is it? And they say, I'm not going to tell you.
Right.
I've signed a confidentiality agreement, and I'd appreciate you not asking me this question anymore.
Right. And then when that agent wants to show that property, many times, correct me if I'm wrong, you would have them sign a confidentiality agreement just in case, if it was Sean Penn's in this instance and he's got photos up or whatever, and they walk through and they put two and two together and figure out who the owner is, they've signed a confidentiality agreement, correct?
Yes. And I also asked them to take their photos down.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, there's a lot of good nuggets on this interview. Is there anything else that you feel like the audience members for the Luxury Listing Podcast might want to take down a little nugget. Again, you shared with us canceled and expired. You talked about how you both you use good mailers that are definitely different than your competition, higher quality. You talked about partnering up when you're trying to level up. You talked about confidentiality and leveraging press, which is great. Is there anything else that perhaps you want to add?
Yeah, I want to add just one other thing, which is the psychological element. So what I've noticed when dealing with luxury clients, there's two things going on with high net worth individuals. Most of them, unless they're in an entertainment field, and even if they've inherited their money, but most of them have made the money themselves, and they are quite smart individuals, and they don't want to be told things. They will ask your advice when they want it, and they will not ask you, and they don't want your advice when they don't want it. So you have to learn that quite often with clients like this, the client thinks they know more about the market than you do. Let them think that, play up to, if that's what their personality type is, then agree with them, and because otherwise you're not going to have a good relationship and they're not going to stick with you. The other thing about high net worth individuals is that you can imagine if you have a lot of money, everybody wants something from you. Everybody always wants something. They always want something, and you always have it's like all these birds pecking at you. And you don't want to be another one of those birds pecking at them. You want to gain their trust, which means sometimes you need to say, even though you'd be making a really great commission on something, you need to say, look, these are the problems with this transaction, and I want you to be wary that these are what my concerns are. I just want to give you that information so you can make a choice about it. And they may be market conditions. It could be a million number of things, but don't always go for the quick buck with them. Go for the long-term relationship, because once you get in a certain circle, they refer all of their friends to you.
Mm-hmm. That you bring up a great point. So, when I speak and train on national stages, I talk about when Robert De Niro from Meet the Parents talked about the circle of trust, right? So getting in the circle of trust with the high net worth individuals, it's difficult to break into it, Patrick. But what you're saying is if you do a good job, you under promise and you over deliver and you get the results, that you will get referral upon referral if you do those things. Fair to say?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, Patrick, what's the best way?
My real estate site is patricklillyteam.com and thetownhousespecialist.com. I too speak extensively. You can reach me at patricklilly.com. And then one of the things that I do is I have a real estate conference every year for top producing agents. This year we're going to be in St. Louis at the Four Seasons
nice.
In the end of really nice. It's a beautiful hotel and we got a really good room rate. And it's just for top July. Let's see. The actual dates are August 1st and August 2nd, but the opening night is the last night in July. So I guess that's July 30th, 31st, something like that. Anyway, you can go to realestatesuccess.rocks as opposed to .com. realestatesuccess.rocks, and you can find out more about the conference.
Well, that's great. St. Louis is a great city. Obviously, I'm based in the Chicagoland market, and my wife and I take our kids down there. Big Cub fans, so we finally, could brag over the Cardinals. But appreciate your time today, Patrick. And again, that was patricklilly.com for speaking, and then Patrick Lilly. What was the other site?
PatrickLillyTeam.com for real estate,
yeah.
And realestatesuccess.rocks for the conference.
Well, again, I really appreciate your time. It's valuable. And again, thank you for those listeners that stuck around and listened to the Luxury Listing Podcast. Again, our next episode, keep an eye out. Again, we are going to be interviewing top luxury agents such as Patrick, industry leaders and service providers that help with lead generation, conversion, to help you become a luxury listing specialist in your particular market. Again, my name is Michael LaFido, founder of the Luxury Listing Specialist Certification. Thanks again for listening.